My name is Sam Whitaker. I'm 34, and I'm the head of product at a tech company in Seattle. On paper, that sounds impressive, right? Maybe the kind of title that would turn a few heads at Thanksgiving. But in my family, those heads have always been turned in one direction toward my older brother Derek. He's the so-called family genius, the one who could build a computer before he could ride a bike. The guy everyone expects to change the world. For as long as I can remember, I've been the underdog. You know, the one who tries hard, but never quite steals the spotlight. At every family event, there's always been this unspoken script. Derek's name comes up first. His stories get the big reactions, and whatever I say kind of fades into the background. I don't think anyone means to make me feel small. It's just how things have always been. If I'm honest, I learned pretty early to play my part. I'd crack a joke about being the backup child, or deflect questions about my job by making it sound like all I do is sit in meetings. After a while, it was easier to let people believe I was content staying in my brother's shadow than to risk sounding bitter. That's not to say I haven't had my own wins or moments I'm proud of, but family dynamics are funny. Sometimes you get stuck in a role you never really chose. But here's where it gets interesting. Last Thanksgiving, everything shifted. I'm not talking about a small moment or a quiet realization. I mean a real shake-up. The kind of thing that turns old stories upside down and forces everyone to see things in a new light. For maybe the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the underdog anymore. If you've ever felt overshadowed in your own family, you'll want to hear this. I grew up in a suburban neighborhood where every house looked about the same. And the most exciting thing that ever happened was the 4th of July block party. My parents, Mike and Karen, worked hard and did their best to give my brother and me a good life. We had dinner together most nights, took road trips in the summer, and spent holidays crowded around a wobbly dining table that somehow made room for everyone. But if you were sitting with us at that table, you'd notice there was always one clear main character. Derek was the star of our little universe. He had this knack for picking things up fast, like when he figured out how to fix the old VCR before he was out of grade school, or when he won the elementary school science fair with a volcano that actually smoked. My parents went wild for his projects, taking pictures, cheering from the front row, and telling anyone who would listen that he was a future engineer. He was also good at sports, which didn't hurt. Dad put his baseball trophies up on a special shelf, and Mum saved every newspaper clipping that mentioned his name. Meanwhile, I drifted along just under the radar. I was the kid who tried a little bit of everything but never quite stood out. My soccer medals didn't get a display. My own science fair entries, like the one where my plant wilted halfway through, got polite claps and a pat on the head. If Derek and I both had something on the same weekend, it was clear which event got the family's energy. I'd joke about being the supporting actor, but deep down, I felt more like an extra in my own family story. There were moments that stick with me even now, like the time Derek got first place in a statewide robotics contest, and the whole family went out for dinner to celebrate. When I won Most Improved in Band, Dad congratulated me in the car on the way to Derek's game. Every holiday, there'd be some cousin or uncle asking Derek what he was building now, or what his next big project would be. I usually just smiled and filled people's drinks or helped clear the plates. Looking back, I can see that my parents didn't do any of this out of malice. They loved both of us, but they couldn't help being swept up in Derek's orbit. It's hard not to get excited about the child who seems to be breaking new ground every year. I can laugh now at how many times I tried to impress them by memorizing random facts, thinking maybe I'd find my own special lane. If you ever wondered what it's like to be the kid with a fridge drawing right next to a blue ribbon trophy, trust me, you get used to taking up a little less space. Even now, there are nights when I can almost hear the sound of my mum's camera shutter snapping away at Derek's science experiments. I remember the pride in my dad's voice when he told the neighbors about Derek's latest win. It's a strange thing growing up surrounded by love, but never quite feeling like you're enough. That feeling shapes you in ways you don't notice until you're much older. High school was when the gap between Derek and me started to look like a canyon. He was taking AP everything, starting a robotics club and spending weekends building websites for local businesses. I was passing my classes, working a part-time job at the grocery store, and trying to figure out where I actually fit. When college applications came around, Derek landed early admission to MIT, and you would have thought he'd just been accepted to NASA. The house buzzed for months about his move to Boston. My decision to major in business at the University of Washington barely caused a ripple. The only reaction I got was a sideways glance from an uncle who said, "That's the easy route, right?" I shrugged and laughed it off, even though it stung more than I wanted to admit. Family gatherings became their own kind of tradition. Every Thanksgiving, Derek would fly home with new stories about cutting-edge projects and tech internships. There was always a moment in the meal when someone would raise a glass to him. Dad would beam with pride. Mum would blink away happy tears, and even distant cousins seemed to hang on every word. I'd be at the far end of the table talking with the kids or helping Grandma June in the kitchen, grateful for a reason to stay out of the spotlight. My own updates sounded small by comparison. Still in school, working part-time. Nothing big. I learned to make my voice light to act like it didn't matter. There were times, though, when the difference wasn't just implied. I remember one Christmas after Derek demoed a new app he'd built. A relative turned to me and said, "Not everyone can handle a real career in tech, right, Sam?" The room broke into polite laughter. I smiled too, because what else was I going to do? On the ride home, my dad told me not to take it personally. "People are just proud of your brother," he said. I nodded and stared out the window, wishing just once someone would ask what I cared about. Still, I kept going. I finished my business degree and took internships wherever I could get them, working behind the scenes in marketing project management, and even a summer running social media for a nonprofit. It wasn't glamorous, but it taught me how organizations really worked. I found out I liked solving people's problems as much as technical ones. When I landed my first full-time job after graduation, I was so proud I could hardly sleep. When I called home, my mum said, "That's great, Sam. Did you hear Derek got promoted already?" I congratulated him before I told her about my own raise. Sometimes I'd catch myself comparing our resumes or imagining what it would feel like to be the center of attention for once. There were late nights when I'd question every choice I'd made, wondering if I'd just taken the path of least resistance. But I also noticed something else. The more invisible I felt, the more determined I became to carve out my own success. I didn't need to be Derek. I just wanted to prove to myself, if not my family, that I could build something real. Those years shaped me in quiet ways. I got used to being underestimated, to letting people assume I was content with second place. The joke in the family was that I was the easygoing one, but the truth was I worked twice as hard just to keep up. I learned to take pride in small wins, to be okay cheering for myself even if nobody else noticed. That invisible motivation became my secret fuel, quietly pushing me forward, while Derek took his victory laps at every family dinner. If you've ever sat at a table where your story felt like the background music to someone else's headline, you'll know exactly what I mean. My first job out of college wasn't flashy. I joined a tiny tech startup in a cramped office above a pizza shop, answering emails, drafting blog posts, and figuring out how to get our product noticed in a crowded market. The team was young and hungry, and most days it felt like no one really knew what they were doing. That suited me fine. I liked being part of something that could fall apart or take off any day. Still, when I told my family about the job, I could hear Derek's smirk through the phone. He said, "So you're in marketing now? Guess somebody has to make the flyers. It stung, but I laughed it off. Deep down, I wanted to prove that my role was more than handing out flyers or posting tweets. I started staying late learning basic HTML from YouTube tutorials and helping the engineers with customer feedback surveys. If someone needed an extra hand testing new features or writing instructions, I volunteered. My boss noticed, and 6 months in, I got put in charge of a small project. It was nothing glamorous, just a new email campaign. But for me, it felt like stepping up. There were plenty of nights when I was the last one at my desk, staring at a spreadsheet that made no sense, or rewriting a press release until my eyes blurred. Sometimes I'd fail hard, like the time I crashed our company website, by copying and pasting code in the wrong place. I stayed up half the night fixing it, and brought donuts the next morning as an apology. The team forgave me, and I learned more from that mistake than from any win. For every project that flopped, another one landed. Each little victory became proof that I could do hard things, even if no one else was watching. Nobody in my family really saw this side of my life. When I called home, my parents would ask if I was eating well and if my hours were reasonable. Derek's updates would fill the air all about patent applications and venture funding, and I'd nod along with a smile. I stopped expecting them to understand what it meant when I got a shout-out from my CEO, or when a campaign hit its targets. Those wins were mine, and I held them close. The more I learned, the more curious I became about the technical side. I started teaching myself Python in the evenings and asked our engineers endless questions. At first they were skeptical, probably thinking I just wanted to pad my resume. But when I started making small contributions to the product roadmap, mapping user journeys, and suggesting features customers actually wanted, they let me in. That trust took time to earn, and I knew I had to be twice as prepared just to get a seat at the table. Promotion didn't come fast. I spent years moving from project coordinator to marketing manager, always looking for ways to bridge the gap between teams. I built new habits. I kept a notebook of ideas and lessons learned. I said yes to tough assignments even when they scared me. My social life shrank for a while, and there were weeks when I wondered if I was just spinning my wheels. But whenever I thought about quitting, I'd picture that invisible finish line, proof that I belonged not just in my brother's shadow, but on my own merit. There were highlights that never made it into family stories, like the first time our startup was featured on a big tech blog, or when we landed our first international client because of a strategy I pitched. I celebrated those moments with my teammates, sometimes with cheap beer or late-night takeout, always with a quiet sense of pride. It felt good to win, even if the applause was small. If you've ever worked quietly in the background, pushing past your own doubts, you'll know that kind of satisfaction. I learned to take pride in my progress and to let setbacks make me stronger. Looking back, I see now that every small step, every long night, and every overlooked win were building something much bigger. I was becoming the kind of person who could keep moving forward no matter who was watching. If there was one person in my family who never made me feel invisible, it was Grandma June. She was my dad's mum, a retired math teacher with quick hands and a sharper mind, the kind of woman who could solve a crossword in ink and balance a checkbook without a calculator. Most people thought of her as old-fashioned, but she understood the world in her own way. She also saw me in a way no one else did. Growing up, she'd pull me aside at family gatherings and ask what I was working on, not what Derek was building. She'd listen without interrupting, nodding along, even when I rambled about new projects or office drama. Sometimes when I doubted myself, she'd quote some piece of logic or a math proverb, turning it into a lesson about patience or perspective. There's more than one way to solve a problem, she'd say, handing me a plate of cookies. And sometimes the quiet answer is the right one. After college, when I felt lost at my startup job, she was the one I called. I remember sitting on my apartment floor with a cold cup of coffee telling her about the latest project I'd fumbled. She listened until I finished, then laughed softly and told me, "Sam, not every win gets a ribbon. Sometimes you have to keep track of your own victories." She reminded me that success isn't always obvious, and that the way I connected ideas, linking people plans and details, was a gift, not something to hide. What made Grandma June different wasn't just her wisdom, it was how she made me believe I could be more. She'd send little notes in the mail with encouragement, old newspaper clippings about people who made it late in life, or a postcard from a trip with a puzzle written on the back. Her support gave me hope on days when my progress felt invisible to everyone else. She taught me to trust the long game, to be steady, even when recognition was slow to come. Sometimes I'd visit her on Sunday afternoons, and we'd play cards or walk around her garden. She'd talk about her own days as a teacher, how the kids who struggled at first often surprised everyone in the end. "You never know who's going to bloom, Sam." She'd say, her voice full of quiet certainty. Looking back, I realized those talks kept me going. They made me believe I could find my own way, and that being different from Derek was not a weakness but a strength. Even now I think of her voice when things get tough. She always believed the right moment would come, that the world would eventually notice the ones who keep showing up. She never stopped telling me that my way of seeing things mattered. Long before anyone else recognized what I could do, Grandma June made sure I never forgot it. My career never shot upward in a straight line. It moved quietly, step by step, the way rivers shape rock, by persistence more than force. I went from marketing manager at a little startup to a mid-sized tech company where I learned how product teams actually turned ideas into something people used. I spent nights reading up on user experience, shadowing engineers, and finding ways to translate business speak into tech language. After 2 years, I moved again, this time to a company that was bigger than anything I'd ever known, with floors of glass offices and a lunchroom that never ran out of coffee. At first, I felt out of my depth, but I leaned on what I'd learned from years of adapting. I watched how the best people worked. I volunteered for new projects, taking on more than my title suggested always, with an eye on how the parts fit together. My curiosity paid off. Within a couple of years, I was promoted to product lead. A year after that, I landed a role as Director of Business Integration, overseeing teams who handled everything from new partnerships to product launches. Despite the new responsibilities, my family barely noticed the change. Every Thanksgiving or Christmas, my parents would ask the same thing. Still in marketing, and I'd smile and nod. Part of me wanted to lay it all out, to say how many people I managed, or that my company had actually gone public the year before. I could have told them about the nights when my team stayed late to solve a client emergency, or the times my name appeared at the top of a project's success story. Instead, I kept it simple, downplaying the promotions, so the conversation stayed easy. Some of this was habit, but a bigger part came from not wanting to upset the balance. After years of being the easygoing one, I didn't want to seem like I was bragging. Our family had a way of slotting everyone into a role. Derek was the innovator, the one people bragged about at neighborhood parties. I'd become the steady background presence, the helper, the safe bet. Sometimes it felt easier to keep that peace than to risk jealousy or competition. But I'd be lying if I said I never wanted more. There were moments like after a major product launch, or when my boss singled me out in front of the whole department, when I'd wish someone from home could see it. Sometimes I'd imagine bringing my parents to work, letting them see the floor where people actually listened when I spoke. I wanted them to know that I wasn't just still in marketing, but that I had made a place for myself where my voice mattered. That longing didn't come from bitterness. It was more like the ache you get when you see something beautiful, but can't share it with anyone who really matters to you. Even Alex, my partner, would nudge me to tell my family more. But every time I tried, the conversation would turn. Someone would ask about Derek's new project, or remind me to say hello for them. Over time, I let myself believe it didn't matter. I built my own network of friends and coworkers who celebrated my wins, and I learned to find satisfaction in the work itself. Still, each holiday I'd find myself rehearsing what I'd say if someone asked, really asked about what I do. The words would stick in my throat. I didn't want to seem resentful or like I was trying to steal Derek's spotlight. The risk of changing how my family saw me felt bigger than the comfort of a few moments of pride. So I smiled, told them things were going well, and let the conversation drift back to safer ground. Quiet pride can be lonely, but it also builds a kind of strength. With every new challenge, I grew more confident in what I could handle. I stopped waiting for recognition to validate my work. That tension between wanting to be seen and choosing to stay in the background followed me through every promotion. It shaped the way I led my team and the way I showed up for the people who depended on me. What I didn't know then was that this quiet climb was bringing me to the edge of a turning point I couldn't have predicted. The day started out like any other, full of meetings and back-to-back calls about new integration projects. I sat at my desk, coffee in hand, scrolling through the list of possible acquisition targets my team had flagged for review. Halfway down the spreadsheet, I saw a name that stopped me cold. The company was called Blue Horizon Labs, and the founder was listed as Derek Whitaker. My brother's name glared back at me from the screen, and for a moment I wasn't sure if I was imagining things. I checked again, reading the summary twice. It was definitely his company. My first instinct was to push the report aside, close my laptop and pretend I hadn't seen it. My heart hammered in my chest. I knew the rules about conflicts of interest. Part of me wanted to recuse myself and hand the file off to another director. But the other part of me was curious, maybe even a little desperate to see what Derek had really built away from all the family stories and Thanksgiving hype. I took a deep breath and opened the full report. The tech was impressive, just like everything Derek had ever touched. Their product had great reviews and the engineers were top-notch. But as I read further, I noticed the financials told a different story. Blue Horizon Labs was bleeding money. Their customer base was shrinking. Marketing costs were out of control, and they hadn't hit a revenue target in over a year. The more I dug in, the clearer it became. Derek's team could code circles around anyone, but no one had figured out how to turn innovation into actual growth. I stared at my notes, realizing I was looking at the exact business gaps Derek used to tease me about. All those years he rolled his eyes at marketing, all the times he joked about real tech versus office work. And now those were the very problems putting his company at risk. I felt a wave of sympathy mixed with something I didn't expect: pride. He had pushed himself, taken risks, and built something real. But he had also ignored everything I'd learned to value. This was the crossroads we had never talked about. I set up a meeting with my boss to talk through the conflict. She listened carefully and said the choice was mine: step back or advise from a distance, making sure every move was documented. I chose to stay involved as an advisor, putting my professional responsibilities first. It wasn't easy. Every decision I made was double-checked. I kept every conversation with my team by the book, never letting my personal connections slip into the business. It felt strange to be this close to Derek's world, seeing its flaws and potential up close, while he had no idea I was on the other side of the table. Over the next weeks, my team worked late on due diligence. The more I learned, the more complicated it got. Derek's company really was innovative, but their business plan was threadbare. Customer feedback went nowhere. Partnerships had fizzled because no one could translate the technical jargon into benefits people understood. The company's runway was short, and everyone knew it. For the first time, I saw how crucial my side of the industry really was. It hit me that value wasn't just in the code. It was on the bridge between ideas and the real world. As the acquisition talks heated up, I wondered if Derek suspected anything. At family dinners, he still played the part of the bold founder, tossing out buzzwords and dodging any question about money. I kept quiet, feeling the tension grow inside me with every conversation. There was a surreal edge to it, knowing more about his situation than anyone else at the table, while pretending nothing had changed. My loyalty was split, but my integrity kept me on the right path. I was there to help my company, not to settle old scores. By the time we made an official offer, I was sure it was the right decision for both sides. Blue Horizon Labs needed new leadership and a strategy that would give their technology a chance to thrive. The day the deal was finalized, I sat in my office long after everyone had left, thinking about what it would mean for our family. For the first time, I felt a deep sense of respect for the journey I'd taken and for all the unseen work that brought me to this moment. I knew this was only the beginning. The real confrontation was coming, and nothing about it would be easy. Thanksgiving at the Whitaker house always felt a little bit like controlled chaos. The kitchen steamed with the smell of turkey and potatoes, every counter covered with something waiting to be stirred or sliced. My mum called out for help with the gravy, while my dad chased my niece around the living room pretending he could catch her if he just moved a little faster. My partner Alex arrived with a pie in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other, slipping easily into the mess of relatives. There were cousins I hadn't seen since last Christmas, aunts debating the best way to make stuffing, and uncles loudly discussing football, even though nobody was really listening. Through it all, Derek's voice floated above the noise. He moved from room to room, dropping quick stories about work and adventure, never missing a beat. Everyone seemed drawn to him. The cousins gathered close, waiting for him to talk about his latest project, while my parents hung on his words, proud as ever. He had that easy charm, the kind that made people believe anything he said. I found myself staying near the kitchen, helping Grandma June fold napkins, while we watched the show from a quiet corner. Grandma June noticed everything. She didn't say much, just smiled as she took in the swirl of family around her. Every so often she'd squeeze my hand, or give me a look, the kind that said she was paying attention, even when the rest of the room wasn't. Sometimes I wondered what she was really thinking, but she kept her thoughts to herself, storing them up for just the right moment. Alex slipped over and handed me a mug of coffee, whispering that I should try to relax. I smiled, trying to steady the nerves that were buzzing in my stomach. The afternoon rolled on, full of laughter, clattering plates and old family jokes. But beneath all that, I felt a growing tension. Every time Derek launched into another story about his company, the room leaned in. Every time someone asked about my job, the answer faded quickly, almost lost in the shuffle. I wondered if anyone else felt the weight of things left unsaid, or if I was the only one counting the moments until the truth finally spilled out. Dinner was almost ready when the energy in the house seemed to tighten. Derek's voice rose above the others, and for a second the whole family stopped to listen. I glanced at Grandma June, who just nodded gently and patted my hand. In that instant, I knew something was coming. I didn't know how or when, but the usual script was about to break. I took a deep breath and braced myself for what was next. Dinner that night felt like a scene set up for something no one could predict. The table was overflowing with food and chatter, every seat taken. Candles flickering and crystal glasses catching the light. My mum passed out plates of turkey while my dad made his annual toast to family new beginnings and sticking together. Derek jumped in as soon as the last fork hit the table, telling a story about how he'd just closed a big deal at work. The room grew quiet. Everyone was listening, as always, waiting for another story of innovation and success. Aunt Linda asked what I'd been up to at work. I started to answer, but Derek cut in his voice, loud and casual. He said Sam still does marketing at that big company, right? keeping the brochures pretty while the rest of us handled the tough stuff. The words landed with a soft laugh around the table. I caught my partner Alex's eye, felt his hand squeeze my knee, and tried to let it slide off my back, just like always. But this time it stung more than usual. I swallowed and nodded. It's a little more complicated than that. But sure, I said, forcing a smile. Derek shrugged, turning back to his audience, already ready to spin the next story. Dad jumped in to ask Derek about his new product launch. I could feel every muscle in my neck tense. There was a strange buzzing in my head, a mix of anger and resignation, the old cocktail that came out every holiday. That's when Grandma June spoke up. Her voice was gentle, but cut through the room like glass. She looked straight at Derek and said, "Is that why your company just became part of Sam's?" The words seemed to hang in the air for a moment, slow and heavy. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Derek stared at her, stunned, not sure if he'd heard right. My mother set down her glass so carefully that it barely made a sound. "What are you talking about?" Derek said, looking from Grandma June to me, then to the rest of the family. His confidence started to crumble, replaced by a confused, embarrassed kind of anger. The room went so quiet, I could hear the radiator clicking on in the hall. I let out a breath I hadn't known I was holding. My hands shook a little under the table. I looked at my parents, my cousins, and then back at Derek. "My company just finalized an acquisition," I said, steady as I could manage. "Blue Horizon Labs. Your company was the target. I was in charge of the advisory team for the deal." It felt strange to say it out loud. I could see the shock roll across the table like a wave. Derek pushed his chair back an inch, eyes wide. "No way. You're not serious." I would have known. "I talked to executives from the other side, Jessica." His wife leaned forward and said, "Actually, Sam's name was on some of the paperwork, Derek. I thought you knew." Her voice was small, but certain. Dad looked lost. He said, "Sam, you were the one who bought Derek's company. Why didn't you say something?" I struggled to find the right words, feeling old frustration rise up with all the new nerves. "I recused myself from most of the direct negotiations because of our relationship," I said. "But yes, I was on the advisory team. The decision wasn't personal. It was about what was best for both companies." I looked at Derek, saw how angry and exposed he felt. "Your technology is great, but the business side needed help. The acquisition was a chance for everyone to win." Derek shook his head, voice trembling. "You mean I spent months fighting for my company and you were sitting in the background waiting to take it?" His face was flushed. Hands were clenched on the table. "How long have you known?" I answered honestly, my own voice tight but clear. "Since the first report landed on my desk. I kept it professional because I knew it was the only way forward. I never wanted to hurt you." Grandma June spoke again, calm and steady. "Sometimes the person you overlook is the one keeping you afloat," she said. Maybe it's time we all saw that. Silence settled over the table, thick and awkward. My mum's eyes were shiny with tears, and my dad looked like he was trying to do math in his head. Derek pushed back from the table, scraping his chair across the floor, and stood up so quickly his napkin fluttered to the ground. "I need some air," he muttered, and walked out, leaving the door swinging behind him. Nobody moved for a moment. My heart thudded in my chest. Jessica leaned forward, looking at me with a strange mix of sadness and relief. "We were struggling more than Derek let on," she said quietly. "The deal saved us. He just couldn't admit it." The rest of the family looked at me, suddenly curious about what I actually did, as if I'd turned into someone new in the space of a few minutes. I answered their questions as honestly as I could. I explained how the process worked, how the acquisition came together, and how I'd tried to keep everything fair. It was awkward having everyone's attention for once, but it was also freeing. For years, I'd lived in the shadow of my brother's brilliance, letting my own achievements hide in the background. Now the truth was out, and I could feel something shifting. The rest of dinner moved quietly, the usual noise replaced by careful questions and thoughtful silences. My mum touched my hand and said, "I wish we'd asked more Sam." Grandma June smiled at me, her eyes full of pride. "You were never invisible to me," she said softly. For the first time, I believed her. Even though the room still felt raw, there was a sense of something new growing in the cracks. Sometimes when the truth finally breaks through, it leaves everything shaky for a while. But it also makes space for something real to start. That night, as I helped clear the dishes, I realized the family story was changing, and for once I wasn't just a background character. I found Derek outside on the porch, hunched over on the steps, with his hands stuffed in his pockets. The air was cold and sharp, and the quiet felt different from the hush inside the house. I sat down next to him, leaving just enough space that he could decide if he wanted to talk or not. For a long time, neither of us said anything. We listened to the wind and the faint sounds of laughter drifting from the kitchen. I watched my breath cloud in the dark, waiting for him to break the silence. Finally, he spoke. "I thought I was supposed to be the one everyone counted on," he said. Voice tired. "I always felt like I had to win at everything, or else I was letting everyone down." He looked at his shoes, shoulders slumped. "Losing the company. I didn't know how to tell anyone. I guess it was easier to pretend I had it all figured out." I nodded, letting him take his time. "It never looked that way from where I was sitting," I said gently. "You always seemed like you knew exactly what to do. I was the one struggling to keep up." Derek let out a rough laugh, then shook his head. "You don't know how many nights I'd sit up worrying I'd make a wrong call and blow it all. I thought if I just kept working harder, nobody would see how close I was to falling apart." I could hear the fear in his voice, real and raw. It made me realize he'd been carrying more than I ever guessed. "We all thought you were unstoppable," I told him, voice low. "But I get it. Trying to be perfect is a lot to ask of anyone." For a while, we both just sat there, listening to the traffic a few blocks away. I cleared my throat, feeling the weight of my own words. You know, it's not easy always being in the background either. I spent years thinking that if I worked hard enough, maybe someone would notice. It got to the point where I stopped even trying to share my wins, because it seemed like there was never any room for them. Derek turned toward me, his expression softer now. "I'm sorry, Sam. I never meant to make you feel like you didn't matter. I was so busy chasing my own goals that I guess I forgot you had yours too." His apology caught me off guard, and I felt my chest tighten with a mix of relief and old sadness. "It wasn't all your fault," I said quietly. "Families get stuck in these patterns. I played my part too. I thought maybe if I stayed quiet, nobody would expect much, and it would hurt less if I got overlooked." He nodded slowly, the old tension easing from his face. "I wish I'd paid more attention. Maybe we could have helped each other instead of trying to outdo each other." The words hung in the air between us, honest and unpolished. "I think we still can," I said, after a moment. "Your technology is incredible, Derek. But business is more than just what happens in the code. We could actually make a great team if you want." He looked surprised, but I saw a spark of hope in his eyes. "You'd want to work with me after everything?" I smiled. "If we can survive Thanksgiving, I think we can handle anything." He laughed. He really laughed for the first time that night. It felt good, like something old and stubborn had finally broken free. We sat together for a while, letting the cold air clear out the last of our pride. He told me about his fears, his plans, and the ways he wanted to start over. I listened and shared my own hopes, and for the first time in a long time, we felt like equals. We promised to have each other's backs at work and at home, no matter what came next. When we finally stood up and walked back inside, something between us had changed. We weren't just brothers now. We were partners too. When Derek and I came back inside, the house felt a little softer, like everyone had taken a deep breath they didn't know they were holding. The conversation at the table had shifted quieter, but more open, and this time my parents looked right at me. My dad asked Sam, "Can you tell us more about what you actually do at work?" And for the first time, it wasn't just a polite question. It felt real. My mum leaned in, eyes shining, listening as I described my team, the products we worked on, and what it meant to help a company grow from the inside out. My words didn't come out as practiced or perfect, but they landed. Cousins nodded. Even Derek threw in a question or two, genuinely curious. I felt the old invisible weight start to lift as people saw me in a new light. My mum reached for my hand across the table, squeezing it with a kind of pride I hadn't known in years. Dad raised his glass voice a little shaky and said, "We're so proud of you, Sam. I wish we'd asked sooner." Then Grandma June stood up and clinked her fork gently against her glass. She looked at everyone and smiled, her voice steady and clear. "I think it's time we celebrate all kinds of brilliance," she said. "The ones who invent, the ones who build, and the ones who make it all work behind the scenes. It takes more than one kind of genius to make a family or a business. And sometimes the greatest gift is to really see each other." Her toast was simple, but in that moment it felt like a new chapter was opening. Everyone raised their glasses. There was a quiet joy around the table. Not just relief, but real connection. I felt something settle in my chest. Gratitude, pride, and a sense of home that I'd been chasing for a long time. Change, I realized, might come slowly, but it can come even in the middle of an ordinary family dinner. Looking back on this journey, I realize that being the underdog isn't about the roles others give you. It's about the story you tell yourself and whether you have the courage to rewrite it. For years, I hid in the background, shrinking to make space for others, thinking that was easier than standing out. But real recognition doesn't come from one big moment or a dramatic win. It comes from being honest with yourself and having the strength to speak your truth, even when it feels risky or uncomfortable. Finding my light meant breaking away from the old family script and accepting that my path didn't have to look like Derek's to be valuable. I had to stop waiting for someone else to notice me and start showing up as my full self. That wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick, but it was worth it. When I finally shared my story, it changed how my family saw me and how I saw myself. I learned that we don't have to be defined by other people's expectations or the shadows they cast. If you've ever felt invisible or underestimated, know that your story matters. Your truth matters. It takes courage to stand in your light, especially when old patterns try to pull you back. But every step forward creates space for new possibilities and new connections. I invite you to share your experiences with finding your voice and standing in your truth. What moments changed your story? How did you start rewriting the narrative? These conversations are where real change begins. They remind us that family dynamics aren't fixed, and neither is our worth. We can grow, heal, and build relationships that celebrate all the different ways we shine. Thanks for listening to my story. I hope it inspires you to find your own light and share it boldly with the world.